Della drove the scrubbing brush so hard across the marble that the bristles cracked and folded under her hand. She did not feel the splinter that bit into her thumb. She felt only the name that had just come through the drawing-room door. The name she had buried 5 years ago and walked over every morning since. Renmore. Spoken in a voice she would have known in her grave. She knelt in the great hall of Thornfield House at 6:30 on a grey October morning, a pail of cold water steaming faintly at her side, and she did not move. Beyond the tall white doors, not 10 feet from where she scrubbed, a man was telling the Duke of Thornfield that the missing Countess of Renmore would be declared dead within the fortnight. "A sad business," the man said, and she heard the smile in it, the old velvet cruelty she'd grown up beneath. 5 years gone. No body, no word. The courts are satisfied. I shall have the title confirmed by the Feast of All Souls, and the estate with it. "And you wished my signature on the petition," said the Duke. His voice was lower, harder to read, a stone dropped into deep water. "Why mine?" "A peer of your standing lends weight. A grieving cousin asks only that the law be allowed to grieve with him." Della looked down at her hands. They were red and chapped, the nails worn to nothing, the knuckles cracked from 5 winters of cold water and lye. They did not look like the hands of a countess. That was the whole of her safety, that no one in England would ever look at these hands and think to ask whose they had been. She pressed her bleeding thumb flat against the marble and made herself breathe. Marcus. Her father's brother's son. The man who had walked into Renmore Hall the night her father was laid in the ground and told a 15-year-old girl that she had 2 choices, and that both of them belonged to him. She had chosen the third. "Go." She had not heard the doors open. She looked up, and the Duke of Thornfield was standing over her. He was a large man, broad through the shoulders in a way that no tailor could soften, and he filled the doorway as a closed fist fills a glove. Dark hair, unpowdered, pushed back from a hard brow. Grey eyes that missed nothing. She had learned that in the 8 months she had worked beneath his roof, learned to keep her face down and her voice in her throat whenever those eyes came near. They were on her now. "Your Grace," she said, and bent her head, and waited for the floor to be ordinary again. It was not. "You have broken your brush," he said. "I'll fetch another, Your Grace." "And bloodied my marble." She looked. A thin red smear ran from her thumb across the white stone, bright as a struck match. "I'll clean it directly. Forgive me." He did not move. Behind him, in the warm yellow light of the drawing-room, she could see the edge of a green coat, a pale hand resting on the arm of a chair, the gleam of a signet ring she had last seen on her own father's finger. Marcus had not risen. Marcus never rose for anything he did not have to. "You were listening," said the Duke. It was not a question, and she had served enough hard masters in 5 years to know that the wrong answer to a thing that is not a question can put a woman in the road by nightfall. She kept her eyes on the marble. "I scrub where I'm told, Your Grace. I don't hear what isn't mine to hear." For a long moment he said nothing. She felt his attention on the top of her bowed head, like a hand pressing down. Then, from inside the room, Marcus called out, idle and amused. "Thornfield, are you scolding the help? Leave the wretched creatures to the housekeeper. Come, I've a hunter you must see before the light goes." The grey eyes held her 1 heartbeat longer. "Bind your thumb," the Duke said. "I'll not have you bleeding through the house." And he turned and went back into the warm room and shut the white doors. And Lady Adeline Carow, Countess of Renmore, knelt alone in the cold hall and wiped her own blood from the floor with the hem of her apron. She had been someone once. She told herself she did not remember it, and she remembered all of it. The schoolroom at Renmore with its south windows, her mother's voice reading French aloud and laughing at her own accent, the weight of the Renmore locket against her breastbone, the little gold oval with the wren picked out in garnet, the only thing she had carried out of that house, and the one thing she could never sell, never show, never wear, sewn now into the lining of the plain grey bodice she wore against her skin every day, where no maid would ever think to look, and no master would ever think to find it. 5 years. She had been a kitchen drudge in Bristol, a laundress in Bath, a scullery girl in a coaching inn where she had learned to sleep with one hand around a kitchen knife. 8 months ago, she had come to Thornfield House in Hampshire, with a forged character reference and a name that was not hers, and she had thought herself safe at last, buried so deep in plainness that the past could not find her. And the past had driven up the avenue this morning in a green coat and asked the Duke to help it bury her for good. "Della?" Mrs. Pell's voice came sharp down the servant's stair. "Della, where in heaven? There's the breakfast room yet to do and Lord Crane's man wanting hot water carried up. Move yourself, girl." Lord Crane. So that was the name he wore now. Sir Marcus Carrow, knighted for some service to some minister, calling himself Lord Crane as a courtesy until the courts handed him the earldom that was hers. Della rose from her knees, every joint protesting, and picked up her broken brush and her pail. "Coming, Mrs. Pell," she called, in the flat, tired voice of a girl who had never been anyone at all, and she went down into the warm dark of the kitchens, with her enemy's hot water to carry up the stairs. The kitchen at Thornfield was the only warm place Della trusted. Copper hung on the walls in a great burning rank. The range threw heat to the rafters, and in the middle of it all stood Pip, the boot and knife boy, 11 years old and built like a question mark, eating a heel of bread he had certainly stolen. "You look like you've seen a ghost," Pip informed her, around the bread. "All white. You ill?" "I'm cold." "You're always cold. Mrs. Pell says you've ice for blood. I said no, she's just from the north, that's all. They're cold up there." He swallowed. "That lord come. The green one. His man kicked the dog." Something turned over in Della's chest. "Kicked Nelson? In the yard, for being underfoot." Pip's narrow face was dark with 11-year-old fury. "Nelson never did nothing. He just wanted his ears done." "Where is he now?" "Under the still-room steps. Won't come out." Della set down her pail. She found, beneath the floorboards of her exhaustion, a small, clear flame of anger she could afford. Anger at a thing small enough to be safe, a kicked dog. And she let herself feel it, because it was so much easier than feeling the rest. She went to the still-room steps and crouched in the cold and held out her cracked red hand. And after a while, the Duke's old spaniel came creeping out on his belly and put his grey muzzle into her palm and trembled. "There," she murmured. "There. He's a coward and a worm, and you're worth 10 of him. And someday the world will know it." She was not, she thought, speaking entirely of the dog. "Come on. Kitchen's warm." She was carrying Marcus's hot water up the back stair when she heard his voice again, through the door of the blue guest chamber, speaking to his valet in the careless way men of his kind spoke in front of servants, as though they were furniture that happened to have ears. "Before Hadley returns, that is the whole of it. The old fool sailed for Lisbon 2 years past, and a man may hope the sea keeps what it takes. But if Hadley sets foot in England before the declaration is sealed, he will make trouble. He served the old Earl 40 years. He has notions about the girl." Della stood on the stair with the steaming can in her hands and did not breathe. "Notions, my lord," said the valet. "That she lived, that she ran." A low laugh. "Sentiment. He has no proof, and the courts have no patience. But a sentimental old steward weeping in a witness box is an untidiness I would rather not have. 3 weeks. 3 weeks, and the Carrow earldom is mine, in law, and forever. And let the old man weep into his Portuguese wine." Hadley. Mr. Hadley, who had taught her to ride, who had slipped her out of Wrenmore in a fish cart at 15, with £20 and his own daughter's name sewn into her cloak. Hadley was alive. Hadley was in Lisbon. Hadley believed she lived. And Marcus was racing the calendar to seal her death before the one man in England who could unmake him came home. 3 weeks. Della carried the hot water in and set it down and curtsied to the man who would have her legally dead by All Souls, and he did not so much as glance at her. And she went out again, and on the dark stair she pressed her forehead to the cold plaster and understood, with a calm that frightened her, that she was done running. She did not yet know what she meant to do. She knew only that for 5 years she had survived by being no one, and that being no one would not save her now. Now it would simply make it easy. She would have to become someone again. The question that kept her awake on her narrow cot under the eaves while rain ticked on the slates all that long October night, was whether there was a single soul under this roof, or in all of England, that a vanished countess in a maid's grey gown could dare to trust. In the morning she made her decision by accident, which is how she made most of the bravest things she ever did. The Duke of Thornfield kept his library locked, and Della had the key, because someone had to clean a room, and the Duke trusted his books to a girl who he believed could not read them. Every Thursday she dusted the long shelves and beat the hearthrug, and never opened a single volume. Because a maid who reads is a maid with a past, and a past was the one luxury she could not own. This Thursday she found the Duke already there. He stood at the long table with documents spread before him, and he did not look up when she came in, and she had half backed out again when he said, without turning, "Stay, light the fire. It's cold enough to crack stone." She knelt at the hearth and laid the fire, and she was aware of him the whole time, the size of him, the stillness. He was reading. The documents, she saw with one sideways glance, bore a black seal she knew, the Wrenmore seal, the wren on the broken tower, and her hands shook so that the kindling rattled. "You're afraid of me," the Duke said. "No, Your Grace." "You're a poor liar for a woman who's clearly had practice." He set down the page. "I have watched you 8 months. You flinch from no work and no weather. You carried a sick footman down 2 flights in the spring when grown men stood gaping, and you've a back like a coach spring. You are afraid of nothing in my house, except that door when Lord Crane is behind it, and that seal on this table just now." His grey eyes came up and pinned her. "Why?" The fire caught. Yellow light leapt up the chimney and across the spines of 1,000 books she had spent 8 months pretending she could not read. And Della knelt on the hearthrug in her grey gown with her cracked red hands, and made the choice that ended her safety. She looked him in the eye, which a housemaid must never do, and she said, "Because that seal is a forgery, Your Grace. The wren on the Wrenmore arms faces left, toward the tower. On your document, it faces right. Whoever cut that seal had never seen the true one, only heard it described. Lord Crane is asking you to set your name to a counterfeit." The silence in the library was absolute. The fire snapped. Somewhere far below a door closed and a dog barked once and was still. The Duke of Thornfield looked at his housemaid for a very long time. "A scullery girl," he said slowly, "who reads heraldry. I notice things, Your Grace. It's the only thing I'm good for. You read the Latin on that spine when you came in. Your eyes went to it before your hand did. You corrected Lord Crane's man yesterday. He called the long gallery the Great Gallery, and you said long under your breath as you passed. I heard you." He came around the table, slowly, the way a man approaches a horse that may bolt. "You set the table on Tuesday, with the fish forks at a dinner that had no fish, and then you changed them before Pell saw, and I have lain awake half a night, Della, wondering what manner of maid knows that a counterfeit seal faces the wrong way." She stayed on her knees, because to stand would be to declare herself, and she was not ready. Her whole body screamed that she was not ready. "Get up," the Duke said quietly. "I'll not question a woman on her knees on my hearth." She got up. "Now," he said, "look at me. And tell me your name, your true one. I'll know if you lie. I've watched you lie to Pell every day for 8 months, and I can see the seam of it now I know to look. Tell me who you are." And Lady Adeline Carrow, who had been Della the housemaid, and Mary in Bath, and a nameless drudge in a Bristol kitchen, and a 15-year-old girl in a fish cart with £20 and her old steward's blessing, stood in the firelight in her grey gown, and felt the whole long weight of 5 years rise up in her throat. "If I tell you," she said, "and you are his friend, I am dead, not in law, in truth. You understand me, Your Grace. He has wanted me dead for 5 years, and he is 3 weeks from having it stamped and sealed, and if you go to him with what I am about to say, you save yourself the trouble of a forged document, because a confessing impostor can simply be handed to the magistrates and hanged, and no court in England will weep for her." "I am not his friend," the Duke said. "I have never been his friend. I signed nothing. Look at the table. The petition is unsigned, and it will stay unsigned." His jaw was tight. "He holds a debt of my late father's that he has spent 2 years dangling over my sister's good name, and I have smiled at him across my own dinner table for the privilege of keeping Sophia out of the scandal sheets, and I have hated every hour of it. So tell me, woman, who is it he wants dead? Because I begin to think that you and I want the same man broken." Della looked at the unsigned petition. She looked at the forged seal, with the wren facing the wrong way. She looked at the Duke of Thornfield, who had carried a debt across his own table to protect his sister, who had told a frightened maid to bind her thumb, who had a back like a closed fist, and grey eyes that missed nothing, and had, for 8 months, missed her. "My name," she said, "is Adeline Carrow. My father was Henry Carrow, the 8th Earl of Renmore. I am the missing Countess that Lord Crane is 3 weeks from declaring dead. And I have washed the floors of this house for 8 months, and a dozen houses before it for 5 years, because the man drinking your brandy murdered my inheritance, and would gladly have murdered me. And the only place in England he would never think to look for a countess was on her knees with a scrubbing brush." The fire burned. The Duke of Thornfield did not move, did not speak, did not take his eyes from her face. And then, slowly, he reached into his coat and drew out a folded paper, worn soft with handling, and he opened it on the table beside the forged seal. And Della saw that it was a portrait, a printed broadside, 5 years old. "Enquiry after the person of Lady Adeline Carrow," and beneath the words, a crude engraving of a girl of 15, with her hair dressed high, and her mother's locket at her throat. "I have carried this for a year," the Duke said softly. "Since the night Crane first sat at my table and spoke of his vanished cousin with that smile. I knew the smile was a lie. I did not know where the truth had gone." He looked up. "It had gone to its knees on my floor, and I walked past it every morning." "Then you'll help me," she said. It was not a question either. She had learned from him. "God help us both," said the Duke of Thornfield. "Yes." They could not be seen together. That was the first hard truth, and Della named it before he could, because she had spent 5 years learning the architecture of being unseen, and he had spent 30 learning to be looked at. And on this one subject, she was the master, and he the pupil. "If the Duke of Thornfield takes a sudden interest in his scullery maid," she said, "the whole house knows it by supper, and Crane knows it by morning. You cannot summon me. You cannot speak to me in passing. The only place we may safely talk is here, on a Thursday, when I clean this room. And even that is a thread." "Then we make the thread carry," the Duke said. "What do you need?" "Hadley." She said the name like a prayer. "My father's steward. He sailed for Lisbon 2 years ago, and Crane is terrified of him. I heard it through the door yesterday. Hadley knows I lived. He helped me run. If Hadley comes home and swears in court that he put a living girl into a fish cart on the night I am supposed to have drowned, the declaration of death collapses and the forgery with it. But he must come home before All Souls, and he does not know I am alive, and I cannot write to him, because I am a dead woman. And a dead woman's letter from a duke's house would be opened and read by Crane's people at every posting inn between here and the coast. It would not be opened, said the duke, if it went out in the Thornfield mail, under my seal, on Admiralty business. He was already pulling a fresh sheet toward him. I have a cousin at the Admiralty who owes me more than he can ever pay. A packet from Mr. Hadley, gentleman, of Lisbon, carried in the official bag, sealed by a duke. No posting clerk in England will so much as breathe on it. What is the message? Della came to the table. She stood beside the Duke of Thornfield, close enough to smell the wood smoke and clean linen of him, and she put her cracked red finger on the blank page, and for the first time in 5 years, she let herself be the woman who had been taught to think. Not my name, she said. If the packet is taken, my name is my death. Something only Hadley would understand. Something Crane could read 100 times and never crack. She thought. The schoolroom rose up, the south windows, Hadley lifting her onto her first pony, the words he always used. Write this. The wren you grieve has not flown. She nests yet, and waits for the gardener who taught her wings. Come home before the frost, old friend, and bring your own true account of the night the garden flooded. For there are crows at Wrenmore, wearing the wren's own feathers, and only you can name them false. The Duke wrote it in his own hand, swift and black. He'll know it's you. He called me his wren. He taught me to ride, to fly, he said. The night the garden flooded is the night I ran. The river was up. The fish cart nearly foundered at the ford. No one knows that but Hadley and me. Her voice was steady. It surprised her. How steady. He'll know, and he'll come. 3 weeks, the Duke said, folding the page. Lisbon and back, with luck and a fair wind, in 3 weeks. It is the thinnest thing I have ever staked a fortune on. It is thicker than anything I have had in 5 years, said Della, and she watched him press his ducal seal into the wax, the Thornfield heart leaping. And she thought, absurdly, that she had not stood this near a man's strength since her father died, and that she had forgotten it could feel like shelter instead of threat. The Duke caught her looking. For one unguarded moment, the hardness went out of the grey eyes, and something else stood there, startled and young. Then Mrs. Pell's voice came up the stairwell. Della, the breakfast room! And the Countess became the maid again, between one breath and the next, dropped her eyes, bobbed a curtsy, and went out with her dusters under her arm, leaving the Duke of Thornfield alone in his library, with a sealed letter, a forged petition, and the strangest hour of his life. The next fortnight was a war fought in glances. Marcus stayed. He had taken Thornfield as his base for the season, partly to keep the Duke's signature within reach, and partly, Della understood now, because Thornfield House lay on the London road, and he meant to ride to town the moment the declaration was sealed, and seize the Wrenmore estate before the ink was dry. So he sat at the Duke's table every night, beautiful and cold in his green coats, his fair hair and his easy laugh and his eyes like wet slate. And Della carried his dishes and filled his glass and learned, with a serving girl's invisible patience, the whole shape of his plan. She learned it in the dining room, refilling wine while he boasted to the Duke's neighbours. She learned it on the stairs, outside doors, in the long gallery where voices carried. She learned that he had bribed 2 of the old Wrenmore servants to swear they had seen her body pulled from the river. She learned that the magistrate who would hear the declaration was a man named Pottle, who owed Crane money. She learned that the forged codicil, the document that made Marcus heir over a living daughter, was kept in a dispatch box that never left his valet's hands. And every Thursday, She carried what she had learned into the library and laid it before the Duke like a maid laying a fire. And together, they built their countercase, stick by stick. The danger came closest at a dinner. The Duke could not simply shut his doors against the county for a fortnight. A man who suddenly stopped entertaining was a man with something to hide. And the one thing he and Della could not afford was the appearance of a secret. So the neighbors came, as they always came. The Fenwicks from the next valley, the rector and his talkative wife, and, worst of all, old Lady Harborough, who was 78 and deaf as a post, and had buried 3 husbands and forgotten nothing in 80 years of looking at faces. Della carried the soup and the fish and the saddle of mutton, moving along the wall in her grey gown with her serving girl's invisibility, and she felt the old woman's pale eyes follow her twice down the length of the table, and her stomach turned to water. "That girl," Lady Harborough announced, in the carrying voice of the very death, when Della had set down the sauceboat at her elbow. "That one there. Come here, girl. Let me look at you." The whole table looked. Della came, because a maid summoned must come, and stood with her eyes down and her hands folded, and her heart slamming against the locket in her bodice, while a pair of ancient eyes that had seen her mother dance at her come-out crawled over her face. Said Lady Harborough. "Who are your people?" "Bristol, my lady," said Della, in the flat, north-edged drawl she had built over 5 years. "Nobody, my lady. My mother was in service." "You've a look. I know that look." The old woman's brow furrowed under its white turban. "I have seen that look across a ballroom. Thornfield, where did you get her?" And the Duke of Thornfield, without a flicker, lying as smoothly as a man orders his wine, said, "From an agency in Winchester, Lady Harborough, with a very dull character and a great talent for not breaking the porcelain, which is all I ask of anyone these days." A ripple of laughter went round the table. "You are thinking of her betters, I expect. The good-looking ones all have the same look to an old campaigner's eye. It is the look of being looked at, and they wear it above and below stairs alike." Said Lady Harborough, unconvinced, still staring. But Marcus laughed. Marcus, who had not glanced at the maid once all evening, threw back his beautiful head and laughed. "You'll not get a pedigree out of a parlour-maid, my lady. Next you'll have us tracing the kitchen cat. Thornfield's quite right. The comely ones all wear the same impudence." And he reached out, idle and contemptuous, and chucked Della under the chin with one cold finger, the careless touch a man gives a thing he owns, to turn her face up to the candlelight for the table's amusement. Pretty enough, in a scrubbed sort of way. Smile for the dowager, girl. Della smiled. It was the hardest thing she had done in 5 years. Harder than the fish cart, harder than the Bristol kitchen. To stand under the finger of the man who had hunted her, and the gaze of the woman who half knew her, and curve her mouth into a serving girl's empty smile, while every nerve in her screamed to bite the hand or bolt the room. She smiled, stupid and sweet and blank, and she saw Lady Harborough's certainty waver, because the missing Countess of Wrenmore would never in life have smiled at being chucked under the chin like a tavern wench. And that, the very degradation of it, was what saved her. "There," said Marcus, losing interest, withdrawing the finger. "No Countess in that. Take the sauce away, girl, it's gone cold." "Yes, my lord," said Della, and took it away, and got herself out of the room before her knees gave, and stood in the dark of the service passage with her back against the cold stone, and shook. Across the passage, in the shadows, the Duke of Thornfield, who had risen on the pretext of fetching a particular port from his own cellar so that he might follow her out, stood and watched her shake, and could not, in his own house, full of his own guests, so much as put out a hand. "He touched you," the Duke said, very low, the words coming out of him like something torn. "He touches everything. It means nothing." She straightened off the wall by sheer will. "Lady Harborough is the danger, not Marcus. She knew my mother. If she gets the thread of it, she'll worry it loose in front of everyone, and we lose the choosing of the hour. We need this dinner done, and that old woman in her carriage. "I'll have the port spilled on her companion's gown," the Duke said. "They'll go early." And he did. A footman, all apologies, a ruined silk, the harbour party making their flustered exits before the cloth was drawn. And Della understood, scrubbing the spilled port off the dining room floor an hour later on her knees, that the Duke of Thornfield had just upended his own dinner table to buy her one more night of safety, and that she had stopped, somewhere in the last fortnight, being able to think of him as a master at all. "Bartle can be managed," the Duke said one Thursday, the rain streaking the tall windows behind him. "Not bribed. I'll not fight Crane with his own weapons. But a magistrate who owes a moneylender behaves very differently when a duke buys up a debt and holds it himself. I have done it. Pottle is mine now, though he doesn't yet know it. He will hear the case honestly, which is all we need." "And the two servants who'll swear they saw me drowned?" "Frightened men lie for money and tell the truth for fear. When Hadley stands up, their story breaks." He paused. "If Hadley stands up." It was the crack that ran beneath everything, and they both knew it. The letter had gone out under the Thornfield seal 11 days ago. There was no way to know if it had reached Lisbon, no way to know if a tired old steward would read a riddle about wrens and gardens and understand that his lost girl was calling him home. They had staked everything on a memory and a fair wind, and the calendar did not care. "Tell me about her," the Duke said suddenly. Della looked up from the hearth. "About whom, Your Grace?" "The Countess. You speak of her as though she were a stranger you're defending in court. Lady Adeline this, the missing Countess that. You hide behind the maid even here, even with me, when there's no one to hide from." He came and sat, actually sat, the Duke of Thornfield, on the arm of a chair, bringing his grey eyes down to her level. "I have a living Countess scrubbing my hearth, and I have never once heard her speak as herself. Tell me about her. Not the case. Her." And Della, kneeling on the rug with the cooling ash in her hands, found her throat had closed. "She died," she said at last, very low. "On the night the garden flooded. A girl of 15 climbed into a fish cart, and the Countess of Wrenmore stayed behind in the river. And I have not been her since, because being her was not safe, and the maid was. You ask me to put her on like a gown I have not worn in 5 years, and I'm afraid, Your Grace. I'm afraid that if I take out the girl I was, and she does not fit, I'll have nothing at all. The maid kept me alive. I don't know how to thank her and bury her in the same week." The fire ticked. The rain ran down the glass. "When I was 19, the Duke said, my father gambled this estate to the floorboards and put a bullet, forgive me, put an end to himself in the room above this one, and left me his debts and his disgrace and a sister of 9 to raise. I learned to be Thornfield because Gabriel Hale could not have paid the bills. I have been the Duke so long and so hard that there are mornings I cannot find the boy underneath at all." He looked at her, and there was no Duke in his face then, only a tired man in a cold room. "So, I do not think you have nothing, Della. I think you have 2 people in you, and they are both real. And the trick is not to bury one. It is to let them shake hands. The maid kept the Countess alive. Now let the Countess do the maid the honor of becoming someone worth all that scrubbing." Della laughed, a wet, broken, astonished sound she had not made in 5 years. "That is either the wisest thing anyone has ever said to me, or the most foolish." "In my experience," said the Duke, "the two are frequently the same thing." And he smiled, and it changed his whole hard face, and Della understood, with a small, cold lurch of terror, that she was in considerably more danger now than she had been when she only had to fear for her life. They fell into a way of working that neither of them named. The library on Thursdays was not enough. There was too much to do and too little time. And so they stole the edges of other hours. The Duke took to rising before the house, when only the lowest servants were about, and Della, who had laid the morning fires for 5 years, would find him already at the long table with a candle and a map of the Wrenmore estate spread before him, and they would put their heads together over it for the quarter hour the rest of the house allowed them, and argue. They argued well. That was the discovery that frightened her most. He would propose a stratagem, and she would find the flaw in it in 3 words, and he would scowl and amend it, and she would find the next flaw, and somewhere in the 3rd or 4th round, one of them would say a thing sharp enough and true enough that the other laughed. And the laughing was the trap. Because 2 people who can make each other laugh at 6 in the morning over a forger's seal have already begun to belong to one another, whether they will or no. "You think like a quartermaster," the Duke told her one grey dawn, half in complaint. "You count everything, men, money, days, the angle of a wax seal. I have generals who count worse." "I have been poor for 5 years, Your Grace. The poor count or they perish. It is the rich who can afford to be careless with the sum." She moved a candlestick a half-inch to weight the curling corner of the map, the small, unconscious housewifery of a woman who had handled other people's belongings for a living. "You left the petition where his valet might see it the day he came. You count men's loyalties beautifully, and their opportunities not at all. That is a rich man's blindness." "It is," he admitted after a moment. "Teach me, then. You've a low opinion of my schooling." "I have a high opinion of your nerve and a low one of your suspicion. They are different muscles. Yours has only ever needed the one." She looked up and caught him watching her, and something in the look made her drop her eyes back to the map at once. "We were speaking of the Steward's Road from Portsmouth." "We were," said the Duke, who had not, for several seconds, been thinking about the Steward's Road at all. There was one dawn that neither of them ever afterward quite mentioned, though both of them remembered every minute of it. The map had been gone over so many times it had begun to fray at the folds, and there was, that morning, simply nothing new to say about it. So they did not say anything. The Duke had brought down a pot of coffee himself, rather than wake a servant, and he poured 2 cups of it, which a Duke does not do for a housemaid, and pushed one across the dark table to her without a word, and she took it without a word, and they sat in the grey hush of the waking house and drank it. Rain whispered against the tall library windows. A coal settled in the new-laid fire. Far off, deep in the house, the first scullery girl began to rattle the kitchen grate. The ordinary morning music Della had made herself 1,000 times, and now, for this one stolen quarter hour, did not have to. The warmth of the cup soaked into her cracked hands. The smell of coffee and wood smoke and old leather bindings settled around them like a held breath. She looked, without meaning to, at the length of the room, the firelight climbing the 1,000 spines, the long table, the broad, still man across it, cradling his cup in both hands and watching the rain. And she let herself imagine, for the space of 3 slow breaths, that this was simply her morning, that she belonged in this warm room in the grey light, that the cup was hers, and the fire was hers, and the man across the table was hers, and that no calendar and no cousin and no sea stood between her and a whole long life of exactly this. Quiet and warmth, and someone who poured the second cup without being asked. The wanting of it came up in her so sudden and so fierce that it frightened her worse than Marcus ever had, because Marcus could only take her life, and this could take her armor. She set the cup down. She gathered the frayed map, and the Duke, who had been watching her face and not the rain at all, let her go without a word, because he had imagined exactly the same thing in exactly the same breath, and was wise enough and gentle enough not to say so while it could still be mistaken for a master's claim. Marcus, meanwhile, had begun to test the maid. It was nothing she could have proved, and everything she could feel. He left a book of Latin verse face up on the morning-room table where she must dust, and watched from the window of the next room to see whether her eyes would catch and hold. She dusted around it with a slack, incurious face, and never let her gaze fall below the gilt of its spine, though she could have recited the page. He spoke a cruel French witticism over her head as she served the coffee, the kind a clever woman cannot help but flinch at, and she poured on, blank as a jug, though her hand wanted to shake. He addressed a sudden, sharp word to her in the very accent of the North Country she claimed, to hear if she would answer it native, and she gave him the wrong county's vowels back, deliberately, the way Hadley had taught her to muddy a trail. She passed every test, and she knew, with the cold animal certainty that had kept her alive 5 years, that passing them was itself a kind of danger. For a maid so perfectly, consistently nobody was a maid who had practiced being nobody. And a man like Marcus, who trusted nothing and suspected everything, might in the end be undone less by a flaw than by the flawlessness. "He is circling," she told the Duke at the next grey dawn, and her voice was tight. "Not because he knows, because he is the kind of man who circles anything that does not bore him. And I have stopped quite boring him. I made an error at the harbour dinner. I smiled too well, or curtsied too low, or some small thing. And now there is a splinter of attention in him that was not there before. We have run our luck thin, Gabriel. The clock must be faster than the circling." "A fortnight at best," the Duke said. "If the Lisbon packet sailed when my cousin's letter said it did, Hadley could make landfall inside 2 weeks, and a hard ride from Portsmouth after that. Can you give me a fortnight more of being nobody?" "I have given 5 years," said the Countess of Renmore. "I can give you a fortnight, but not, I think, a great many more. For I find that the longer I stand near you in the dark over this map, the harder it becomes to remember how to be no one at all." And she gathered the map and rolled it, and went down to lay the kitchen fires before either of them could make the silence into something they could not yet afford. The danger had a name, and the name was Sophia. The Duke's sister came down from London in the 3rd week, 19 years old, bright as a struck bell, and entirely unaware that the silent grey maid who brought her chocolate in the mornings was a countess and her brother's co-conspirator. Sophia brought with her the London gossip, the autumn fashions, and, to Della's silent horror, a warm, careless, democratic friendliness that singled out the quiet maid for confidences within 2 days. "You've kind eyes," Sophia informed her, sitting at her dressing table while Della dressed her hair. "Most of them won't look at me. You look. Gabriel says I talk too much. Do I talk too much?" "You talk a comfortable amount, my lady." "That's a diplomat's answer. Gabriel taught you that, I expect." "No, he wouldn't. He doesn't talk to servants. He barely talks to me." Sophia turned, suddenly serious, and dropped her voice. "Della, is my brother in some trouble? With Lord Crane? They're forever shut up together, and Gabriel's gone grey about the mouth, the way he does when the money's bad. Crane frightens me. He smiles at me like I'm a horse he's pricing." She shivered. "Is it bad?" And Della, with the silver brush in her hand and the girl's bright hair falling through her fingers, looked into the glass at this child who could be ruined by a debt and a smile, and made a vow that had nothing to do with her own inheritance. That Marcus Caro would not have this one. Not her name, not her good repute, not her bright, unguarded heart. "It's bad, my lady," she said quietly. "But your brother is the cleverest man I've ever served, and he is not losing. Trust him. And, if I may, keep close to me when Lord Crane is in the house. Don't be alone with him. Will you do that?" Sophia met her eyes in the mirror. Something passed between them, woman to woman, that leapt clean over the gulf of rank. "You're not really a maid, are you?" she said. It was not quite a question. "I'm exactly what your brother needs me to be," said Della. "And right now, that's the woman who does your hair. Hold still, my lady, or I'll never get this side even." That night, Marcus made his move on Sophia, and the war came out of the shadows. It happened after dinner. Della was clearing the dishes from the long sideboard when she heard, through the half-open door to the small saloon, the particular timbre of Marcus's voice when he had cornered something. She set down the plates without a sound and looked through the gap. Sophia stood against the pianoforte. Marcus stood too close to her, one hand on the polished lid, his green coat dark in the candlelight, his beautiful face bent down to hers with the patient cruelty of a man who has all the cards. "Such a small thing," he was saying, "to lift the shadow off your family forever. Your brother's debts to my late uncle would simply vanish. Your name would never trouble a scandal sheet. I ask so little, Lady Sophia. Only your hand, and your brother's gratitude, and that you smile at me as warmly in church as you do across the dinner table." Sophia's voice was very small. "My lord, I do not." "You will think on it," Marcus said. And it was not a request, and his hand came up to touch her cheek. Della walked into the room. She did it without deciding to, the way she had snapped the brush, the way she made all her bravest things. She came in with a candle snuffer in her hand, and her grey skirts, and her downcast servant's eyes, and said, in the dead flat voice of the help, "Beg pardon, my lord, my lady. Mrs. Pell sent me to see to the candles before the family retires." And she crossed between them, as though they were furniture, and snuffed a candle, and another, putting her grey body squarely between the predator and the girl, and she felt Marcus's slate eyes turn on her with the first faint stir of irritation he had ever spared a servant. "Get out," he said. "Come back when you're wanted." "Yes, my lord." Della snuffed another candle, not moving from between them. "Only Mrs. Pell will have my ears if the wax runs, my lord, and her temper's a terror, begging your pardon." She looked up then, one flat, stupid, insolent serving-girl glance, just long enough. And she saw Sophia understand, saw the girl gather her skirts and bolt for the door behind Della's covering bulk. "Shall I do the hall candles too, my lord, while I'm about it?" Marcus looked at the empty space where Sophia had been. Then he looked at the maid. For one cold instant, Della felt his attention truly land on her for the first time. Really land, the slate eyes narrowing, some animal part of him sensing that the furniture had moved on purpose. She kept her face stupid and her eyes down, and her heart slamming against the locket sewn in her bodice. "You," he said slowly. "Have I seen you?" "All over the house, my lord, I expect," said Della. "I do the floors." A long beat. Then he laughed, short and dismissive, and the danger passed like a cloud off the sun. "The floors, of course." He straightened his immaculate coat. "Tell your mistress's brother I've gone up. And girl, learn when a room does not want you." And he walked out, and Della stood alone among the smoking candles with her knees gone to water, and understood that she had just spent a coin she could not afford. He had looked at her now. He would look again. She found the Duke in the library before she had been summoned, which broke every rule they had made, and she did not care. "He went at Sophia," she said, the moment the door was shut. "Tonight, in the small saloon. The debt, the marriage, his hand on her face. I put myself between them and got her out, but Gabriel—" His name came out of her before she knew it was coming. Bare, no grace, no title, just the man. "He's not waiting for the courts. He means to have her one way and the earldom the other. And he looked at me. Properly looked. I've made myself visible, and I cannot take it back." The Duke had risen at the first word. By the last he was standing very close, and his hands had come up to her shoulders, and she realized he was holding her by the arms the way a man steadies someone at the edge of a great drop. He touched her. He tried. "She's safe. She's gone up. I sent Pell to sit with her." Della was shaking now, the night catching up with her all at once. "Gabriel, I'm sorry. I broke our rule. I came straight here. If anyone saw—" "Let them see," the Duke said, low and rough, and the words seemed to startle him as much as her. His hands tightened on her arms. By God, let them see. I have spent 2 years smiling at that man across my own table while he priced my sister like a broodmare and dangled my father's shame over us. And tonight, a woman who has every reason to think only of her own neck put her body between him and Sophia. His grey eyes burned down at her. You could have stayed clearing your plates. He had not looked at you. You were safe in your grey and your silence. And you threw it away for a girl who doesn't even know your name. She's 19, Della said simply. I was 15 when a man like him gave me 2 choices that both belonged to him. I will not stand in a doorway and let it happen again to anyone, ever, if a candle snuffer and a stupid face can stop it. The Duke of Thornfield looked at her for a long moment. Then he let go of one arm and lifted his freed hand, and with the back of one knuckle, clumsily, gently, like a man who has forgotten how, he brushed a strand of hair off her white face. Adeline, he said. Her true name, the first time he had ever used it. It went through her like the first warmth after cold water. Don't, she whispered. Please, not now. If you say a kind thing to me now, I shall come apart. And I cannot afford to come apart. We have 19 days. Tell me what we do. He took his hand back. He became the Duke again, by force. She could see the cost of it. We do what we were doing, only faster, and we guard Sophia like the crown jewels. I'll find a pretext to send her to our aunt in Bath. No. If you send her away the night after he proposed, he'll know something turned, and he'll wonder what. And a man wondering is a man looking. And the one thing he must not do is look. At her, or at me, or at this room. Della wiped her face with the heel of her hand, the Countess and the maid shaking hands at last, the strategist rising up cold and clear through the fear. She stays. She smiles at him. She is frightened and charming, and gives him nothing and no answer. And she keeps me near her, and we run out his clock. 19 days, Gabriel. We give that beautiful monster 19 days of hope, and hand him ruin on the 20th. Can your sister act? She is a Hale, said the Duke, and for the first time that night he smiled. We can all of us act. It is the family curse, and the family trade. He looked at her with something new in his face, something that had stopped being startled, and started being sure. I have been alone in this for 2 years, Adeline. I have forgotten what it was to stand beside someone who does not flinch. Then don't waste it being gallant, said the Countess in the maid's grey gown. Waste it winning. Now let me go before someone finds the Duke alone at midnight with the girl who does his floors, and gives Marcus Caro exactly the story he needs. The 19 days became 12, and the 12 became 9. And Hadley did not come. The house learned to live in 2 stories at once. Above stairs, the Duke of Thornfield entertained his cousin, Lord Crane, with cold courtesy, and Lady Sophia practiced her terror into charm, and laughed at Marcus's wit, and kept the grey maid always within call, and the great machine of a noble household turned over as though nothing in the world were wrong. Below stairs, in the warm copper kitchen, and on the dark back stairs, and once a week in the locked library, a vanished Countess and a desperate Duke counted days against a calendar and a sea. The waiting was its own slow cruelty. There was nothing left to plan that they had not planned 3 times over. The letter had gone. The magistrate was brought back to honesty. The proof was as ready as proof could be without the one witness who could speak it. And now there was only the road from Portsmouth, and the wind on a sea neither of them could see, and the days falling away one by one, like leaves off the great beeches in the avenue. Della found that the not doing was harder than any labour. Her hands, which had scrubbed and carried and mended through 5 years of fear without faltering, betrayed her now in the small, idle hours. A cup chipped on a flagstone, a needle pushed clean through the ball of her thumb, the steady servant's hands gone suddenly unsteady, because the mind above them had run out of things to grip. On the night with 8 days left, she could not sleep at all. She rose from her narrow cot under the eaves, wrapped her shawl about her shift, and went down through the sleeping house to the one warm place she trusted, meaning to sit by the banked kitchen fire until her thoughts let go of her. She did not reach it. On the half landing of the back stair, a single candle was burning, and the Duke of Thornfield was sitting on the cold step beneath it in his shirt sleeves, his head in his hands, looking like no duke at all, looking like a tired man who had also found that he could not sleep. He lifted his head when he heard her. For a moment, neither of them spoke, the impropriety of it hanging plain between them. A half-dressed maid and the master of the house alone on a dark stair at 2 a.m, the very picture Marcus needed, and they could not give him. "I keep counting it," the Duke said at last, low, as though they were in the middle of a conversation and not the start of a forbidden one. "The wind, the leagues. I have stood at the window an hour doing sums a sailor would laugh at. If the packet sailed on the Tuesday with a soldier's wind, but I do not know that it sailed on the Tuesday. I do not know that it sailed at all. I have wagered your neck on a fair breeze, Adeline, and I cannot make the breeze blow by wanting it, and I am not a man accustomed to wanting things I cannot buy or command, and I find it is a kind of sickness." Della sat down on the step below him, which she should not have done, a careful arm's length away, which she made herself do. "When I was in the Bristol kitchen," she said, "in the worst of it, the first winter, I used to lie on the floor by the dyeing range at night and tell myself a sum of my own. Not days. Breaths. I told myself I had only to manage the next breath, and then the one after, and that no power on earth required me to manage the whole of the rest of my life all at once. Only the next breath. It is the only thing I know that makes a thing too big to bear, small enough to carry." She looked up at him in the candlelight, at the hard, exhausted face gone soft with sleeplessness. "We have not lost yet, Gabriel. Nothing is decided. The wind is doing what the wind does, and we are doing what we can. And tonight, just tonight, there is no sum to do, and nothing to grip, and nowhere we must be. And I think you should put out that candle and sleep, because a duke with shadows under his eyes is a duke a clever man watches, and we cannot afford to be watched." "And you?" he said. "Will you sleep?" "No," she said honestly. "But I have had a great deal more practice than you at not sleeping, and at carrying a thing through the dark with no light on it. Go up, Your Grace. One of us should be rested enough to lie convincingly at breakfast." She rose and gathered her shawl, and at the turn of the stair she stopped and said, without looking back, in a voice that was barely above the candle's hiss, "Thank you for the not sleeping, for counting the wind. No one has lost an hour's sleep over me in 5 years, and I had forgotten what it was worth. Good night, Gabriel." And she went up into the dark before he could answer, and the Duke of Thornfield sat a long time on the cold step with the guttering candle, and did not, that night, manage to grip the wind, but found, oddly, that he could breathe. "A ship was sighted off Portsmouth," the Duke said on the Thursday, with 7 days left, and Della's heart leapt, and fell when he went on. "A Lisbon packet, but the manifest's not posted yet, and I cannot be seen haunting the Portsmouth road for a steward I've no reason to know. We wait. If it is his ship, he'll make for here. The letter told him where. If it is not—" He did not finish. "If it is not, I run again," said Della, "or I stand up in Pottle's court with no witness but my own face and a locket, and Marcus's 2 paid liars swear me an impostor, and I hang." She said it without drama, a woman reading a sum. "I have thought about it. I would rather hang as Adeline Carrow than scrub another floor as no one at all. I have made my choice, Gabriel. Whatever comes, I'm done being dead." "You will not hang," the Duke said, and there was something terrible in his quiet. "If Hadley does not come, I will stand up in that court myself and swear before God and Pottle and all of England that this woman is the Countess of Renmore, and let Crane try to break a duke's word against a maid's locket. It will cost me everything. My credit, my name, Sophia's marriage prospects, the lot. And I will spend it like water before I let that man put a rope on you." Della stared at him. "You would ruin yourself. For a woman you've known 8 months. "I would ruin myself," the Duke said, "for the only person who has made this house feel like a home since I was 19 years old." He stopped, as though the words had got out ahead of him. The fire snapped between them. "I had not meant to say that yet." "Then unsay it," Della whispered. "We have 7 days. We cannot afford—" "I know precisely what we can afford," said the Duke of Thornfield. "I've counted every penny of my life since I was a boy, and I am telling you, Adeline Carrow, that I have run the sum 100 times in this room, and it comes out the same every time, and I am done pretending otherwise. When this is finished, when you are the Countess again, and Crane is broken, and you owe me nothing, and could walk out of my life into your own rightful one without a backward glance, I will ask you a question. I'll not ask it now, because now you are in my power, and the asking would be a kind of theft, and I'll not have your gratitude when I want your choice. But I am telling you the question is coming, so that you may have all 7 days to ready your answer. That is the only gallant thing I'll do. The rest is winning." Della stood in the firelight with her cracked red hands and her grey gown, and 5 years of being no one. And she looked at this large, hard, honest man, who had just promised to burn down his whole careful life rather than see her hurt, and who had refused to ask her to love him until she was free enough to refuse. And she thought that she had been wrong all those years about what strength looked like. "I'll ready my answer," she said unsteadily. "Now for God's sake let us go and win, before I forget that I am supposed to be cleaning this room." Hadley came on the 5th day, and he came too late, and he came at the worst possible hour, and he very nearly ruined everything by being exactly who he was. It was evening. The Duke had a dinner, a real one, 8 covers, the magistrate Pottle among them by careful design, and Marcus at the Duke's right hand, expecting that within the week his earldom would be sealed and his betrothal to Sophia announced. Della was in the dining room, invisible in grey, pouring wine, when she heard the commotion in the hall. A traveller, mud to the knees, arguing with the footman, an old man's voice, cracked with sea salt and urgency, demanding to see the Duke of Thornfield on a matter that would not wait. She knew the voice before her mind did. The wine bottle went very still in her hand. "Tell his grace that Hadley is come, James Hadley, late of Renmore, and that I have travelled from Lisbon on the word of his own letter, and I will not be put off by a footman in a hall." And Marcus, at the Duke's right hand, went white. Della saw it happen. She saw the colour leave his beautiful face, saw his hand close on the stem of his glass, saw the slate eyes flick to the door, and then, helplessly, sweep the room, the table, the guests, the magistrate, the servants, looking for the trap, knowing the steward's arrival could mean only one thing, and not yet knowing how much it meant. And in his sweep, his gaze crossed Della's face, the grey maid frozen with the wine, and snagged, because Hadley, pushing past the footman into the doorway of the dining room, Hadley, 40 years a steward, who had lifted a girl onto her first pony and a frightened countess into a fish cart, Hadley, whose old eyes had searched every face on the road from Portsmouth. Hadley looked into the bright dining room and saw, past the Duke and the magistrate and the whole glittering table, a grey-gowned maid with a wine bottle, and his old face cracked open like a struck wall, and he said, in a great, broken voice that filled the whole house, "My lady! Oh, my lady! You're alive!" The room turned to stone. 8 faces swung to the grey maid in the doorway's light. Pottle, the magistrate, fork halfway to his mouth. Sophia, who half rose, one hand at her throat. The Duke, who had gone utterly still, his whole body a held breath, and Marcus Caro, whose beautiful face was no longer white but grey, the colour of the gown, the colour of ash, the colour of a man watching 5 years of careful murder fall to pieces in a single old man's tears. And Della, Adeline, stood in the doorway with the wine in her hand, and felt the maid fall away from her like a dropped cloak, felt 5 years of silence break their long dam. And she set the bottle down on the sideboard with a click, but was very loud in the stone-still room. And she straightened her back, her Countess's back, her father's back, the back that 15 years of being a Caro had built before 5 years of scrubbing had ever bent it. And she said, into the ringing silence, in a voice that no one at that table had ever heard her use, "Hello, Hadley. You're late. I had almost given you up." Her eyes went down the table, past the frozen guests, and came to rest on the grey-faced man in the green coat. "Cousin Marcus, how well you look, for a man who has spent 5 years explaining my absence. Won't you introduce me to your friends? Or shall I do it myself?" "This is madness," Marcus said. His voice was not quite steady, and he heard it, and Ella saw him hear it, saw him fight to gather the velvet cruelty back over the naked fear. He stood. He turned to the magistrate, to the table, spreading his hands, summoning the old easy charm. "Pottle, gentlemen, forgive this. The creature is a servant, plainly deranged, and this old man is some confederate of hers, some sharper come to work a fraud on a great house. There are 100 such schemes in a season. A maidservant who fancies herself a lost heiress. It would be comic if it were not so squalid. Thornfield, have your people remove them both, and we'll think no more." "No," said the Duke of Thornfield. He had risen too. He stood at the head of his own table, in his own house, and when he spoke, the whole room bent toward him, because 30 years of being Thornfield was in it. "They will not be removed," the Duke said. "They will be heard. In my house, at my table, before a magistrate of the county, who happens, by the providence of God, to be sitting at my right hand." He looked at Pottle. "You came tonight to do me the honour of your company. I find I must ask you instead to do the county the honour of your office. There is a matter here for the law, and it has walked in off the Portsmouth Road, and I will not have it swept under my own carpet by the man who forged the broom." "Forged?" Marcus's composure cracked clean across. "You dare!" "I dare a great deal," said the Duke, "for I have your petition in my library with a counterfeit seal upon it, the wren facing the wrong way, cut by a man who never saw the true arms. I have a magistrate's debts in my own strong-box, bought up a fortnight since, so that no man can say Pottle owes you a farthing or fears you a penny. And I have, standing in my doorway, the woman you have spent 5 years and a forger's fee declaring dead." The grey eyes were merciless now. "Sit down, Cousin Marcus. You're about to be introduced." And then it was Della's hour, and she took it. She walked the length of the Duke's dining room, not as a maid walks, quick and apologetic along the wall, but down the centre of the room, past the staring guests, her cracked red hands quiet at her sides and her chin level. And she stopped at the head of the table beside the Duke, and she reached up to the collar of her grey gown and, with 5 years of patience, picked loose the threads she had sewn 100 times, and drew out from the lining the little gold locket with the wren picked out in garnet, and laid it on the white cloth before the magistrate. "My name is Adeline Caro," she said. "I am the only child of Henry Caro, 8th Earl of Renmore, and his wife Eleanor. 5 years ago, on the night of my father's burial, that man," she did not point, she did not need to, "informed me that as my father's nearest male relative, he would be administering my inheritance and my person, and made it plain what the administration of my person would involve. I was 15. I ran. He could not produce a dead body, so he purchased one out of the river, and 2 servants to swear to it. And he has spent 5 years and a great deal of money turning my flight into my funeral. Because a dead countess cannot inherit, and a missing one is merely inconvenient. The declaration of my death is set before this same magistrate for the Feast of All Souls. I am here to spare the court the trouble." She let the silence hold a moment, then turned to Hadley, who stood weeping openly in the doorway. "This is James Hadley, my father's steward of 40 years, who put me into a fish cart at the ford the night the river flooded, with £20 and his own daughter's name. He did not know until tonight whether I lived. Hadley, old friend, will you tell this gentleman what you know?" "I will swear it on any book you like," the old man said, coming forward, his voice shaking, his eyes never leaving her face. "I will swear it before God and the King. That is Lady Adeline. I'd know her in the dark, in rags, in her grave. I knew her this minute across a room full of lords by the set of her shoulders, for she stands like her father stood, and no 5 years of any man's cruelty has bent it out of her." He turned to Marcus, and his old face was terrible. "You told me she was drowned. You stood in the Wrenmore Chapel and told me, weeping, that my girl was drowned, and all the while you'd driven her onto the road. I have crossed a sea to call you what you are, Marcus Caro. You are a liar and a thief, and you have stolen the living to enrich the false, and there is a God above who counts it." The magistrate Pottle had set down his fork. He was a careful, frightened, ordinary man, and he looked from the weeping steward to the grey-gowned woman with the locket, to the great, cold duke at the head of the table, and last of all to Marcus Caro. And whatever he had owed and feared, he was a magistrate first, and the law was walking through his dinner. "Sir Marcus," Pottle said slowly, "these are grave charges. A forged seal, a purchased corpse, suborned witnesses, the unlawful declaration of a living peer's death." He swallowed. "I think you had best answer them. Here. Now." And Marcus Caro, cornered at last, did the thing that cornered cruel men do. He stopped being beautiful. "You stupid little clerk," he said to the magistrate, and the velvet was gone, and what was under it was ugly. "You haven't the spine. Do you know what I am? Do you know whose ear I have in London? I'll have your office, and your house, and your daughter's good names before the snow." He rounded on the Duke. "And you sanctimonious, debt-ridden. You think you've trapped me, with a maid and a senile steward, and a trinket any pawnshop could match. I'll bury the lot of you in lawyers. The girl hangs as an impostor, the old man with her, and you, Thornfield, you spend what's left of your name defending a scullery drudge you've clearly taken a—" He never finished it. He had taken a step toward Della as he spoke, his hand rising. The old gesture, the gesture from the saloon, the gesture from the chapel 5 years ago, the hand that took what it wanted. And the Duke of Thornfield, who had stood very still through all of it, moved at last, and it was like watching a wall decide to fall. He did not strike Marcus. He simply stepped between them, all his broad height, and closed one hand around Marcus's raised wrist, and held it, and the smaller man's arm stopped, as though it had struck stone. "In my house," the Duke said, very quietly, into Marcus's grey face. "You will not raise your hand to her. You will not raise your voice to her. You will not, by God, in my dining room, in front of my sister and a magistrate of this county, finish that sentence." He released the wrist with a small contemptuous push, and Marcus staggered back into his chair. "You are finished, Marcus. Not because I broke you. I've hardly had to lift a finger. You are finished because she lived. 5 years you built a house on the lie that she was dead, And tonight she walked in out of your own cousin's scullery, and the whole thing falls. There is nothing left to do but the law." He looked at Pottle. "Magistrate, do your office. I'll have men at the doors and a room made ready, and in the morning we send to the assizes. Tonight, this man does not leave Thornfield, except in your charge." It was done in an hour, the way such things are, quietly, with papers, with the two big footmen at the door, and Marcus Carrow gone suddenly small and silent in his green coat. The fight ran out of him all at once, when he understood that the magistrate's fear had broken, and a duke's word stood against him, and there was no minister in London who would spend a shred of credit on a man caught forging a peerage. They took him up to a locked room. The dispatch box with the forged codicil went into the magistrate's keeping. The guests went home with the richest dinner-table story of the decade, and Sophia wept and laughed and threw her arms around the grey maid, who was a countess, and said, "I knew it. I knew you weren't a maid. I told you so at the glass." And Hadley sat by the kitchen fire with a blanket and a bowl of Mrs. Pell's broth, and would not let go of Della's hand. And at last, very late, when the house had gone dark and quiet, and the long October night was thinning toward its end, the Duke of Thornfield found the Countess of Renmore, where he had first truly seen her, on her knees in the great hall, scrubbing his floor. "What," he said from the foot of the stairs, "in the name of all that is holy are you doing?" Della looked up. She had a brush in her hand and a pail at her side, and her grey skirts were dark with water. And she was, he saw, half laughing and half weeping, both at once, the way she did everything. "There was blood on the marble," she said. "3 weeks ago. My own. I broke a brush and cut my thumb the morning Marcus came, do you remember? I never got it properly clean, I was too frightened. And it's been there, under the wax, all this time. A little brown stain, only I knew was there. And tonight I found I could not go up to a bed in this house and sleep with it still on the floor." She sat back on her heels. "I have washed this floor for 8 months as a way of being no one. I wanted to wash it once, just once, as myself. To finish the job as Adeline, and then never pick up another man's scrubbing brush as long as I live." The Duke came across the hall. He looked at the small, clean place she had made on the marble, the last brown trace of her own old blood scrubbed away at last. And then, to her astonishment, the Duke of Thornfield got down, all his broad height in his evening black, and knelt on the cold floor beside her. "Then let me help you finish it," he said. "Gabriel, you cannot. You're a duke. You're kneeling on your own—" "I have spent 30 years being a duke," he said, taking the brush out of her startled hand. "I find I should like to spend the next 5 minutes being a man who helps a woman finish a thing that matters to her. Show me. I've truly no idea how this is done. I've had people for it my whole life, which I begin to think has been a great poverty in me." He looked at the brush and at her, and his hard face was open and uncertain and young. "Teach me, Adeline. I'm a quick study. I learned heraldry." And so the Countess of Renmore and the Duke of Thornfield knelt together on the marble floor of the great hall in the last dark hour of the night, and she showed him the angle of the brush, the grain of the stone, the cloth to take up the water, and they scrubbed the last stain of her old fear off the floor together. 2 pairs of hands, one cracked and red, and one broad and unmarked. And when it was done, and the marble shone clean and ordinary in the first grey light of dawn, the Duke set down the brush and did not let go of her hand. "I said I had a question," he said. "When you were free, when you owed me nothing and could walk out of my life into your own. You are free now, Adeline. By tomorrow night, all of England will know that the Countess of Renmore is alive, and that the man who wronged her is bound for the assizes, and your estate will come back to you, and your name, and your whole rightful life, and you will owe me precisely nothing, for the truth would have freed you, and I only carried the letter." He turned her cracked red hand over in his broad one, gently, as though it were the most valuable thing in the house, which, to him, it was. So I may ask it honestly, at last. Adeline Carrow, Countess of Wrenmore, when you have taken back everything that is yours, and stand again where you were born to stand, with no debt to me and no need of any man, will you do me the wholly unreasonable honor of choosing, out of all the lives now open to you, the one that has me in it? Della looked at their joined hands on the clean marble. She looked at the dawn coming grey and then gold through the tall windows. She looked at the Duke of Thornfield, who had carried her letter and bought a magistrate's debt, and refused to ask her this until she could freely say no, who had knelt on his own floor to help her wash away the last of her fear, and who was waiting now, large and still and unguarded, for her to break or make him with a word. "You great fool," she said, and her voice cracked clean across. "I readied my answer 2 days ago, the night you told me to. I've been carrying it about ever since like a locket sewn in my collar, terrified you'd never ask." She lifted his hand to her cheek, the way no one had touched her face in kindness since she was 15. "Yes, out of all the lives now open to me, the only one I want is the one with you in it. Yes, Gabriel, 100 times yes. Now will you please get up off this cold floor before you take a chill, for I find I have a great many plans for the rest of your life, and I should prefer you alive to carry them out." The Duke of Thornfield laughed. A great, surprised, unguarded laugh. The laugh of the boy under the Duke, finally let out into the light. And he rose, and he drew her up with him. And there, in the gold and grey dawn of the great hall, on the clean scrubbed marble where a frightened maid had once knelt over her own spilled blood, he gathered the Countess of Wrenmore into his arms and held her as though he had been waiting 30 years to have something worth holding. And she pressed her face into the wood smoke and clean linen of him, and let go, at last, of 5 years of being no one. The assizes took Marcus Carrow in the spring. The forged codicil and the counterfeit seal damned him past any lawyer's saving. The 2 servants who had sworn to a body broke the moment Hadley took the stand, and told the truth out of the same fear that had bought their lies. The Carrow earldom was confirmed where it had always belonged, in the person of Lady Adeline, 9th holder of the line, who walked back into Wrenmore Hall on a bright April morning, with the south windows of the schoolroom flung open, and her mother's locket worn openly at her throat, for all the world to see. She did not go back alone. She went back as the betrothed of the Duke of Thornfield, and they were married in June in the Wrenmore chapel where Marcus had once wept his false grief. Married plainly, with Sophia for bridesmaid, and old Hadley to give the bride away, his daughter's name long since restored to him with a pension that would keep him in Portuguese wine to the end of his days. Pip, the boot boy, came up from Thornfield in a new coat, and wept and ate too much cake. The Duke's old spaniel, Nelson, who had once crept trembling out from under the still-room steps, slept the whole ceremony through in a patch of June sun, fat and unafraid, and entirely his lady's dog. 6 months after the wedding, on a still October morning very like the one this story began upon, the Duchess of Thornfield came down early into the great hall of Thornfield House. The marble shone in the first grey light. She stood a moment looking at it, the place where she had knelt, the place where she had bled, the place where a duke had got down beside her in his evening black and learned, badly and gladly, to scrub a floor. Her hands, resting on the cold banister, were not cracked and red any longer. 6 months of soft living had healed them, though the faint scar still crossed her thumb, and she would not have had it gone for the world. She turned them over, looking, the way she had once turned them over on this same floor, and thought, no one will ever look at these hands and ask whose they were. "You'll catch your death down here in your shift," said the Duke from the stairs, exactly as he had said it once before, and came down to her with a shawl, and put it round her shoulders, and his arms after it. "I was only looking at the floor," said his Duchess. "I know. You look at it every morning." He rested his chin on the top of her head. "Do you know, I had the marble taken up to be replaced last spring. The whole hall, new stone, no stain, no memory. The mason was here with his rule and his chalk. And then I thought of you scrubbing it clean that last night, finishing the job as yourself, and I sent him away. Some floors a man should not replace. He should only learn to kneel on them. Adeline Carrow, who had washed this floor for 8 months as no one at all, and once, at the very end, as herself, turned in her husband's arms in the golden grey light of the great hall, and put her healed hand against the wood smoke and clean linen of him, and was, at long last, and for all her days, exactly and entirely someone. Some floors, she agreed, a man should only learn to kneel on. And she kissed him, and the October sun came up over Thornfield and warmed the clean and ordinary marble where nobody bled any longer, and where the wren, against all the false crows of the world, had come home at last and found that she had never, after all, forgotten how to fly.